Okay, good morning. Today's shir should be a schus l'refuah shalema for Tinig ben Gila. Should have refuah shalema. I want to talk today about Parah Adumah a little bit. Shabbos coming up. We're going to lay in the next one, the next installment of the Daled Parshiyos of the special kriyas that we do this time of year, and that is Parshas Parah. For Parshas Parah, we lay in. It's a short thing, a few psukim from the beginning of Parshas Chukas that describe the process of Parah Adumah and exactly what Parah Adumah is. Now, I never thought that I would quote in a shir from the spokesperson of Hamas. I think he goes by Abu Ubadiah. Everyone's seen him in the news. And I never thought I would quote from him in a shir, but in a speech that he gave 100 days after the October 7th attacks, which Hamas refers to as Al-Aqsa flood. That's what they call it. Because they want to present it, in a little marketing gimmick, they want to present it as a defense of Al-Aqsa, a defense of the Dome of the Rock, the mosque that's on the Har Bayis. And 100 days into this war, this spokesperson for Hamas got up and he said all the various different attacks and machinations that the Jews are doing to reconquer the Har Bayis and to destroy Al-Aqsa, and all his different tainas. And amongst them, one of the tainas that he said is that the Jews already bought a bunch of red heifers, and they're preparing to sacrifice the red heifers outside the Har Bayis, and everybody knows how this ends. This culminates in them destroying Al-Aqsa and reconstituting the Beis HaMikdash. This is what he said in his drasha. Now it got me thinking, so I looked into it a little bit, and I saw that there's something called Mechon HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael. We've actually spoken about some of their work in the past. When we spoke about the menorah, we spoke about them, but there's something called Mechon HaMikdash. The name of the people in charge of it escapes me. That's been actively trying to find a Parah Adumah, trying to find a kosher Parah Adumah that they could bring. They could do the process of Parah Adumah and create the Efer HaParah to be Matar Klal Yisrael, very much with the intention that could lead to Bias Moshiach and that could lead to Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Meaning, what Abu Abudaya is quoting is basically a direct quote from the Mechon HaMikdash's presentation. Now in 2014 they found their first Parah Adumah. They brought it to Eretz Yisrael. Shortly after that it became possible. In 2018 I think they found two more. They brought them to Eretz Yisrael. They became possible. At some point a rancher by the name of Byron Stinston in Texas, a Texas rancher who specializes in a type of cattle called Texas Red Angus, devout, Christian from the evangelical Christians who believe in Moshiach and Jews and etc., made it his business to start hunting down every potential specimen of red heifer that he could find, and he bred a small herd of red heifers, and he produced 5 completely red Texas Red Angus heifers, cows that could be used for the Parah Adumah. Now Israel and the United States, I think this is pre-Trump, pre-tariffs, has many laws about agriculture. Domestic farm animals are not allowed to be transferred from the United States to Israel. So these 5 red heifers from Texas were given names and were listed as pets on the manifest of the ship that brought them, of the plane that brought them in, and they were flown to Eretz Yisrael in 2022, I think. They were taken to Shiloh, where the Mishkan used to be. They put in a little farm enclosure over there. Then they were brought for a display outside Har Bayis, which is what got the Arab world inflamed. You could read news stories about this. Then they were dispersed throughout a few locations in the country, and they're working on producing more of these heifers. The problem is that this particular min of Texas Angus Red has a habit of growing a second coat of hair when it's about 2 years old, and oftentimes the second coat of hair will some have some white hairs, although they'll get a little whiter in the second coat of hair. So you're running against a hard clock, and they have to. This is a whole thing that goes on, and the people that are pro it are super pro it with a very Zionistic Mashiachist attitude. Like they believe that by finding, not only that by finding, but the fact that a red heifer was found indicates that Mashiach's coming. It's almost the time. Look, everything's coming together. We're finding these red heifers, and they're pushing it. And the evangelical Christians who are very pro this are pushing it, and the Muslims who are very angry about it are upset about it. So it's doing everything that it's supposed to do in this little cycle. So it got me thinking. First of all, what's our attitude b'chlal to these type of simanim, these type of things that indicate that Mashiach's coming? these type of ideas of oh, if this happens, then it means something's coming, something's happening. And Bay's a little bit to why exactly Parshas Parah is such an important parsha that we learn it from these Dalet parshas every year. What it Taka is supposed to symbolize for us, and and these different strands. So I'll try to get to all of them. Hakal Amakayim. Let's start a little bit with Parshas Parah first, and then we'll get to that. So now, this idea, by the way, of somebody being Mechadish Parah Adumah Bizman Hazeh, bringing a Parah Adumah today, I would like to say is the origination of the Mechal Mikdash in 2014, but it's not. Litvish Rav, a small-time Litvish Rav in 1930, his name is Shmuel David Halevi Levin. I don't know anything about him. If anybody knows anything about him, I'd love to know more. He was a Rav in a small village outside Valazhin, so a very normal area. He corresponded with many of the Gedolim whose names we know of. He put out a sefer called Taras HaKodesh in 1930, where the tachlis of the sefer was Bayivur im Efshar Lases Parah Bizman Hazeh L'Tar Likanos Al HaKodesh. Is it possible to make a Parah Adumah today to be Matar Yidden who could go into the Kodesh? And it's 130 pages or something like that. It's a dense rabbinic technical maracha. It's not an easy read at all. It's not a fun read, not an easy read. It's like a dense, rabbinic text. It's about Sveikis and Svek Sveikis and various chumras and days, and the Rambam and Sifri and the Gemara and the Mishnayos and Rashis and Rushes. It's a complicated thing. Now, what struck me is very interesting. A lot of times a non-haskama tells you where someone's head is. Sometimes you'll see a sefer have a haskama or two. You don't know how many people he attempted to get a haskama from, what they told him. Right? You're missing some of the story. Now, in his hakdama to the sefer, he writes it's a 2-page, a little bitter missive in the beginning over here about the sefer. He says, I wrote this sefer. It's a pri amali, a difficult sefer, a hard sefer that covers an obscure topic, a davar mechudish, and yeradati la'imka shel davar. And I went through all the Rambams and Gans Mishnayos Parah. Parah is a great sugya. Parah is a whole Masechta Mishnayos. The Rambam is 15 prakim. There's many Gemaras about it. It's a shver sugya, tifa sugya. I went through it well. I was mechadish something over here that l'daiti it's shayach to bring a Parah Adumah today, even though there's no Beis HaMikdash. And I said I sent my hamtzah to all the Gedolei Rabbanim. And he says, and this is Achin Vei, that we have no more Rabbanim left in this dar. This is what he's writing in 1920, in the late 1920s. He says, Achin Vei, we have no more Rabbanim left in this dar. Kamat, everybody that I sent it to, wrote me back that almost ani betir this, I'm busy with the Dvar Yom B'Yom, I have too many shilas to paskin, I'm too old, I'm too weak, I don't have enough energy, it looks meridik, but I don't have the koiches to get into it. He says, back in the day, Rabbanim were able to learn. If you would send them something like this, a Naya Hamtzah, they'd be all over it. They'd be excited to handle it. And today, all I get is excuses. He says, and even the few who did decide to send me back letters, they chepedzich with these minor nekudis that have nothing to do with the halacha l'maisa. They found on page 47, it says something that I was medayik in a Mishnah L'malach, and they chepedzich with that. Or I was medayik something in a Rash, nothing to do with my Hamtzah, ba'etzim, my halacha l'maisa. And then the Oilan Uladar Hazeh, he says that we don't have Rabbanim, but Afal Pikin, I'm going to put this out, and here's my sefer. This is his thing. And then at the beginning, he brings a few letters from different Rabbanim. Some of them are more famous. Mashal, the Rabbi Baruch Kamai, the Rav of Mir, has a letter over here. The Radzina Rebbe has a letter over here. And it's comical to read, almost every single one of them. And he puts it in bold, because it bothered him. Says, I don't have the kaiches to go through this Inyan, I can't get involved in this topic, but X, Y, and Z. So I guess the silence speaks volumes. People's choice to not respond also tells you how they look at an issue. But in any case, he has this whole marach of Mechadish. Now he is less Meshachist about it. It's less about bringing Moshiach, and it's more about, is it possible to do this? Bizman Hazeh, is it not possible to do this? And I want to go into some of the things that he says, a few of them, but we'll go into a few of them. Now let's just back it up a little bit, Dakdama. The Mechaber in some Tafresh Pehei tells us that it's in Sif Hey, I think. It says as follows: we read Parshas Parah before we read the third of the Dalet Parshas Parah, and then we read Parshas Chodesh. That's like the Mechaber. Now, why is that? So we'll see in a second why that is. But now the Mishnah Berurah, no less than the Mishnah Berurah, says something fascinating in the beginning over here in Tafresh Pesach Aleph. He says as follows, and see what you make of this. He says Hashlishi. He Parshas Parah Adumah. The third parsha of the Dalet Parshas that we read is Parshas Parah Adumah. He b'Shabbos shekodim Parshas Chodesh. It's the Shabbos that comes before Parshas Chodesh. Shekein hayesrei fasa b'midbar samach l'Nisan. Mishnah Berurah glosses over something that really in the Midbar Parshas Chodesh came first. Parshas Chodesh was Aleph Nisan in the Midbar, and Parshas Parah was Beis Nisan in the Midbar. Mishnah Berurah just says that we read Parshas Parah because it was done in the Mishkan, in the Midbar, the year that Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim. The Hi b'Shabbos shekeni sirvasa b'Midbar samach l'Nisan, k'tei lahazes b'as Yisrael be'efer achatas miyad achar kamas Mishkan, so that Klal Yisrael could get the efer aparash gespritzed on them right after the kamas Mishkan. K'dei shiyu tahirim v'yochlu lasas Pesach l'zmaneh. So Klal Yisrael as a whole could be tar, and they can make the Pesach l'zmaneh. The kach chirim parshas. Here's the Mishmura. Lehispala lefanav, to daven in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisbarach, shegam eleinu yizrik mayim tahirim mehera. That also on us he should spritch Parah Adumah vaser, as soon as possible. That's what the Mishmura says. The Mishmura is really quoting a Magen Avram, is that the whole kilu patent, the tachlis of reading Parshas Parah, Erev, Pesach, is b'nisan nigalu, b'nisan asidin ligales, and Klal Yisrael is in our minds wishing and hoping, we're preparing ourselves to bring, Carbon Pesach, which is a ganz Klal Yisrael de Gezach. And in order to be prepared, we need to have Parah Adumah. So we lay in the Parshas Parah as if it's a begeder tefillah, that we should be able to have Parshas Parah, for real, very soon. Azazik Mishabura. The Mishabura is not, Azazik Mishabura. So this idea that Parshas Parah is attached to this time of year, Hilu as a bakasha, as a tefillah, that it should lead to Geula, is mamish in the Paiskim, in the basic Paiskim. Now, we know it's Bakant Zach that there's Rishonim that say the Beis Yosef brings it, the Mechaber brings it over here, that Parshas Parah is the Deiraisa. Right? We know we neman that Parshas Zachar is the Deiraisa and Parshas Parah is not a Deiraisa. But there are Rishonim, it's a Taisus Yishanim and Brachas, and maybe a Taisus and Megillah, depends on which gears you have, that seem to hold that even Parshas Parah is a Deiraisa. Now, L'maisa, we don't pass it like that. We pass it, it's not really a Deiraisa. We're machmer about it, but we don't pass it, it's a Deiraisa. But where does it come from that it's a Deiraisa? So the Kazhin Tzemagid has a psevart, and this became a very popular vart in a lot of Chassidish Svarim after him. It's a machshava. I don't know if it's an alternate understanding of what Parshas Parah is doing, or it's like another layer. So, fit it in where you think it fits in. But the Kazhin Tzemagid says, he makes like his own drasha. He says that the psukim by Parshas Parah, it says over there that it repeats twice, Zois Chukas. The Torah repeats the word, I think Lamar. Torah says Lamar 2 times in the Parshas Parah over there. So says the Kazhin Tzemagid that Lamar means that there's 2 different avodas that are taking place in Parshas Parah. Parshas Parah, Bizman the Beis HaMikdash, Bizman the Mishkan, was a parsha that actual tahara from Tumah. It was Klal Yisrael, you became Tmei Meis, you needed tahara from Tumah, and that's what Mishnayos Parah is about, that's what the Rambam and Parah Adumah is about, that's what tahara meant. It says, but there's a second Lamar in the parsha over there, that's referring to the tahara that a Yid needs from Averis. Tahara, plain tahara. Tahara that a Yid's looking for. And the Lamar tells us that the Kriya of Parshas Parah, which is to reinforce in Klal Yisrael this need, this desire for Tahara that precedes everything, meaning Tahara that comes before everything else, that's what the Lamar, the second Lamar, it's like almost like his own drasha that he brings. After him, Reb Tzaddik says it, and others say it, meaning after him, a lot of Chassidish Svarim pick up this theme that the Kazhin Tzemagid is saying, that there's a second Tahara that's being referenced in the Parshas Parah. Now, Lamaisa, he doesn't bring this raya, but others do. This is Yerushalmi, that Rashi and Megillah and Daf Chavtes brings down. The Yerushalmi says, "B'dinhu shetaktim parshas hachodesh leparshas Parah." Be'atzim parshas hachodesh should have came before parshas Parah, because parshas hachodesh was be'alef b'nisan and parshas Parah was be'beis b'nisan. Ella says the Yerushalmi, why not? Because Tahara comes first. Mipnei she'osik b'taharasan shel Yisrael. It's talking about Tahara of Klal Yisrael. When we're reading a parsha that's talking about Tahara of Klal Yisrael, that precedes everything. So the Kazhin Tzemagid doesn't bring this himself, but other later Chassidish Svarim bring this down. This is the second Tahara that's being discussed. Taharasan shel Klal Yisrael that precedes everything that has to come before. That's what's being referenced in this pasuk. Now, this is what the Kazhin Tzemagid says. Now the Rav Chaim Charnovitz of the Be'er Mayim Chaim, he brings it and litfishizes the Kazhin Tzemagid's Chassidish Vart. He's not quoting the Kazhin Tzemagid, but he says that the Tahara that's being referenced is the Tahara of the Torah. The Tahara that's being taught, that this Deiraisa of Parshas Parah that's being said, is that there's a Tahara that comes from Zois Chukas HaTorah, from Limud HaTorah, that's the Tahara, and that's being reinforced every year, that Parshas Parah is this Tahara that Klal Yisrael needs, and that's a Tahara that's related to the Torah. Now, L'maisa, Reb Tzaddik points out that we know always the Haftarah is supposed to correspond to the Kriya of the Parsha, right? Whatever we read in the Parsha, the Haftarah corresponds to it. And when we read one of these special Parshas, the Haftarah corresponds to it. And he says, if you look, the Haftarah that's chosen for Parshas Parah has nothing to do with Tahara from Tumah. It's the psukim in Yirmi that discuss v'zarakti aleichem mayim tahirim v'tahartem v'chlafti es leva even, and I'll give you a leiv basar. It's the tahara of a yid stam that's being referenced in this haftarah. So Tzaddik says, you see that the kriya of Parshas Parah that Klal Yisrael does is this, taharas Yisrael. Now I don't know if this is another havana in what's going on, like different than what the Mishnah Berurah is saying, different than what the Magen Avraham is saying, that it's like a tefillah for Geula, or it's just like another layer, another deeper layer. But it's another interesting idea that a lot of the Sfarim bring about Kriyas Parshas Parah. Now, it's interesting to me to note, Stam, interessant, that the Chida in one of his Sfarim writes that by him it's Pashut that the Arizal got some of the Efer Apara and got it spritzed on himself. He doesn't say a Messiah where he knows this from, he doesn't say where it comes from, where it was hiding, none of the backstory, the details. He says, by me it's Pashut that the Giluyim that Arizal was Eichatu, he must have gotten some of the Efer Apara. This is what the Chida writes. What do you say? Who's the? Where's the Efer? Nobody knows. But this is the Chida says this. Now, Lamaisa, it's funny. If you look in the different Svarim that handle this, it seems in Shara Kedusha, Rav Chaim Vital writes that Sha'alti es Pi Meiri, how come Rabbi Shmuel has Sefer Echalos and Rabbi Akiva has Medrash HaOisius, and they have these grace, things that we're not zeicha to anymore. And to which the Arizal responded to his Talmud Rav Chaim Vital, because Shehem Netaru be'Efer Apara, Va'anu ein lanu Efer Apara. They had Efer Apara, and we don't have Efer Apara. So in some of the Svarim that write about this, they write about the Chida. The Chida might have meant it, hyperbolically, or to highlight, the level of the Arizal's Kedusha. But the Arizal himself was seemed to have been asked about it and writes that he didn't have Efer Apara. So there's different terutzim that are given. Maybe the Arizal, whatever. Ain't kamakam el harach about that nekuda punkt. But in any case, that's. Again, the Taharas and Yisrael meaning not Tahara that Arizal could have brought Karbanis, but Tahara Yisrael meaning certain Giluyim and certain level of Kedusha that he was able to achieve, that the Chida felt had to be something to do with Efer Apara. Now, in any case, this is what the various Svarim say about Efer Apara. Now, Lamaisa, to do Efer Apara B'zman Hazeh, the real way, is very complex. Because if you'll take out a Mishnayos Parah and a Rambam Menachos Parah Adumah, you'll see that the amount of conditions and chumra shechmiru b'para is immense. Now, why is that? There's a machlekes, the tztukim and the chachmei Yisrael about one nekuda, one little din in Efer Apara, and because of that little machlekes, the entire thing spills over and becomes full of chumras. It says as follows. I'm going to read from the Rambam instead of the Mishnayos because he simplifies everything. The Rambam in Perek Beis of Hilchos Parah Adumah and Perek Aleph, Halacha Yud Gimel. The Rambam says as follows: Kol ha'iskim b'para mitchila v'ad seif shayu tule yom, that are tule yom, which means that they're tamei, but they're waiting for they're chatzi tar. They went to the mikveh, but they're waiting for harav shemesh in order to become completely tar. Ksheru l'maisa aparo l'kadosh l'hazos me'afra. They're kosher to do any one of the avodas of Parah Adumah. V'af bishadayin leharav shimshon. Even though they didn't, complete the shemesh wasn't harav, and they didn't complete their tahara. Now the Rambam continues in Halacha Yudalid. Hatstukin hayoyim. The Tztukin used to say she'ein maisa aparo kosher elab m'ruav shemesh. The Tztukin were very machmer, and they said harav shemesh is what you need, and no one's allowed to participate in the avodah Parah Adumah unless they have harav shemesh. Now, because of this kula that the Chazal were makel to allow Tvulei Yom to do it, not Sam Mekel, they B'dafka wanted Tvulei Yom to do it, to argue in the Tztukim. So Memela, the Rambam continues in Perek Beis, says, Mailas Yiseiris Asa B'Tairis Parah Adumah, V'archakis Gedolos Rechikum M'tumas Hameis B'chol Ma'aseh. Many milas and tremendous harchakas were instituted. Says the Rambam, why? Since Chazal were the Mekilim and the Tztukim were the Machmirim, we now have like reams of chumras that apply to Parah Adumah. Now there's an interesting Pnei Yeshua in the beginning of Megillah, in the beginning of Yuma Daf Beis, the Pnei Yeshua writes, he says, Bevadai, if the Tztukim had kulas, Chazal paid them no heed. They paid no attention to them. But when the Tztukim had a chumrah, he says, I read you, he says, Dafka b'hachin yana de tful yoyim, shat Tztukim ayam achmirim yoysim e'achachamim, mishum hachi yitzruch chacham la'asayse e'hapach midavreim, shinasa dafka b'tful yoyim, kein nearly. The Pnei Yeshua says when there's a kula that Chazal are being the Mekilim and the Tztukim being the Machmirim, then there's a need to overcorrect and have a tremendous amount of chumras. Now, Yich, Shiaf, whatever the reason is, today the Parah Adumah, as it's described in Mishnayos Parah and how the Rambam paskins it, is full of chumras. Very, very difficult chumras to accommodate everything. And that's basically what this whole Sefer Taras HaKodesh goes through, is to show you which ones are Medina, which ones are L'chumra, which ones we could live without, which ones are Kosher B'diavad, and V'chulu. Now, what he does bring is a fascinating premise. What he ends up saying is that he says as follows. He says, the Rambam says, the famous Machlekes Rambam Rava, the Rambam says, Kedusha Rishon Kitchel Shait V'Kitchel Das Lavi, the Harabayis is Kaddish, you're not allowed to go on it. others, the Ravid and other Rishonim, Achelik and the Rambam, they say no, Kedusha Rishonah Kitchel Shana V'lai Kitchel As Lavai, and you're allowed to go on the Har Bayis. As I zak the Rambam, Machlekes Rambam Ravid. Now, elsewhere we have Machlekes Rishonim that the status of Kehanim is Manazeh. Now, this is something that actually gets a lot of airtime these days. What's the status of Kehanim is Manazeh? Are they Vade Kehanim? Are they Cheskas Kehanim? When you let him make, what corners could you cut? So what he wants to do is create a Svek Sveika Lekula. He says we have Safek Kehanim, choose a Kayin who's a Safek Kayin B'chazaka, and he'll make a Parah. He'll make a proper Parah Adumah with all the pitch of case, how he figures it out. He'll have a Safek Parah. Now he says you can have a Kayin who could be Netar with that Safek Parah and go into the Beis HaMikdash because he's Safek allowed to. So he says Svek Sveika Lekula. A Safek Kayin with a Safek Isser going into the Beis HaMikdash, Svek Sveika Lekula. It's not Svek Sveika Ames Hapech, and the Rambam doesn't hold of it. I'm telling you, it's no fun reading the Sefer, but it's a whole arichas, this whole binyan that he does to create this thing. Now, the problem is that there's a Rambam that's very schwer for him to deal with. A Rambam that he has a hard time dealing with, and I want to read it for you. The Rambam says as follows. He's coming from a Mishnah in Parah. The Mishnah in Parah says, the Mishnah in Parah counts out, like, the tzelta amount of how many Parah Adumas were done in Klal Yisrael's history. It's a Mishnah in Parah Perek Gimel says as follows: Mi asam, who made the Parah Adumas? Harishayna asa Moshe, Hashniya asa Ezra, which is a tremendous merchik, by the way, of years, meaning that a Parah Adumah lasted them, which is itself a shmuz that people talk about. V'chamish me'ezer ve'elach, 5 from then and on, Divrei Meir. V'chachamim ma'imrim, 7 me'ezer ve'elach. Either way, however you count this out, you have sachakol at taps, 9 Parah Adumas that were done in Klal Yisrael's history. That's all that you have, 9 Parah Adumas. Now says the Rambam, and this is something the Rambam's Meisif, in Perek Gimel, in the end of Perek Gimel, the Rambam says as follows. He says, Rishayna asa Moshe, Shniya asa Ezra, Shiva me'ezra ad Chorban Abayis, V'ha'asiris, and this the Rambam says in his own, V'ha'asiris, the 10th Parah Adumah, the ultimate Parah Adumah, Yasa ha'melech ha'mashiach meheri yigola amein kein yiratzin. As I the Rambam. The Rambam says the 10th one Mashiach's going to make when he comes, amein kein yiratzin. Now this is very difficult to deal with. Now those who want to say that it's like an aschat de geula and the fact that a Parah Adumah was found means Mashiach's pashat at the door, so they point to this Rambam. They say, you see, if a Parah Adumah is found, it's already being prepared for Mashiach. Yeah, shvach hamaisis. But this is what they point to Rambam. Lamaisa, the Reb Shmuel Levine in his Sefer Taharas HaKodesh has to deal with this. L'chayr, the Rambam seems to say Parah Adumah is not something that we could do anymore. The 10th one, Mashiach's going to do it when he comes. How does it pass to say it? So it says him, and this is a Maridik Chap, he says the Rambam L'Shitasai doesn't have a Svek Sveika. Because the Rambam says you're not allowed to go on Har Bayis. The Rambam is no Sveik L'Dina. The Rambam Paskins, Kid Shurishayna, Kid Shalasad Lavi, it's asked to go on the Har Bayis. So according to the Rambam, you have Chad Sveika. You have a Safek Parah that was made with a Kayin who's a Safek. That's not enough to be Saimachan. According to the Rambam, we have to wait till Mashiach comes. He says, according to us, who we have a Sveika D'Dina, because we don't know if we pass like the Rambam in the first place, so if us we have a Svek Sveika, we're able to make a Parah. This is his Hamtzah, his Cheshbon. Now there are people today who are trying very hard to do this. Unfortunately for them, the Parah Adumas keep timing out. They keep growing white hairs. It's an imperfect strain, and they keep growing white hairs and they're not available. But this is the shmooze, the presentation that he makes that's still applicable today. Now, the part that I really wanted to get to me that's very negay over here, is the part of using these type of simanim as indicators that Mashiach's coming. It's a very popular thing to do, all sorts of things, and every cries that people points to the things that make them feel warm and fuzzy and say, this is, Mashiach's around. There's not one size fits all in what people point to and say, this means Mashiach's around the corner. But that whole idea, I want to talk about a little bit in this context. There's a tshuva from the Shevet HaLevi. I've said this over in the past. I don't remember where, but I said it over in the past. I love this tshuva. But let me just build up the backstory a little bit of the tshuva. If you know Jewish history, there are many, many years that people felt, based on gematrius or Ramazim or current events or whatever, people felt Mashiach was coming. Some of the most famous ones are, let's say, like Tach, the year 1648, which we know Nebuch turned into pogroms and massacres, but Tach V'Tat, the year Tach was a year that had many, many gematrius. And Grace Svarim, not the Heilige Svarim from a long time ago who wrote these gematrius, who suggested these things, it existed. The year 1810, the year 1820, the year 1760, the year 2000, there's many, many years that were years that there were gematrius or different schools or ideas that Mashiach was coming in those years. And, to be honest, many Chashav Svarim and Gedolim, not, by and large, like Klal Yisrael came to a consensus about something. You'll find here and there a very Chashav Sefer from a very Chashav person who will say something, who will quote such a remes, quote such a deal, such a thing. Now, Mivei Sindach, that the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Vav says, Tipach Rucham Shemachash V'Kitzim. Amar Avavo, I think, Tipach Rucham Shemachash V'Kitzim, where Chazal are very down on people who cheshbon out when Mashiach's coming, because people are going to say, Im loy ba, shovei nei ba. If he doesn't come the day he predicted, he's not going to come anymore. And the Rambam, Kayidua, paskins like this in Nechus Malachim, the Rambam says, Zume hadvarim she'eni mevi leili de'ava v'leili de'yira. This is not from the things that bring not to ava, not li de'yira, and you should just avoid it, stay away from it. Don't try to lock it down too narrowly. The Maisa, the Rambam himself in Igeres Taimon, seems to have some sort of family messiah of Epis Kabbalah that he brings in the Rasag, and the Ramban elsewhere, and the Barbanel elsewhere. So it's hard to know, and that's a sugi for Arzach. Maybe we'll cover it one day. If that's really a Isser Gamor, if it still applies with Zanazah, the different types of figuring it out, maybe Alpi, Ramazim, or Alpi Zmanim, Psukim and Daniel, and it's a whole shmooze for itself. We'll leave it. But there's a tshuva from Rav Vosner in Chelik Yod Tshuva Aleph that I want to read. Here's as follows. It's a shaila from Rav Mordechai Genuth, who's the madfis of the Luach Davar Be'itay. It's a fine Luach, it's on Eitzer Chachma, you can see, it's a good Luach. And in the year, I think this is before the year 2000, he writes to Rav Vosner to ask him a shaila as follows. Shal Kvoidai, Im Lahazkir B'psichas L'Luach, Sheshnas Tafshin Samach, which I think that's 2000, Haba Aleinu, Me'inyan Zman B'yas HaMashiach Tzidkenu, Sheramas Kamas Svarim HaKadoshim Al Shana Zu. I think it starts with the Rebbe of Meiluch, but it's in a lot of other Svarim after that, that suggested that the year 2000 is the year for Mashiach to come. He says, should I write in the Hakdama to the calendar that this is a year, that might have to do with Mashiach? Or maybe you brought in your letter, some were pro, some were anti. He says, I don't have, ASIC in this. It's a closed world. He writes, Midrashim, they find that it's not Negeya. He says, Amru Chachamenu Tipach Daitun Shamachash Vekitzim Eli Chake V'Yamin. That's what the Rambam writes. He says, V'im, this is the part that's Negeya. V'im Kama V'Kama Gedali V'Tzadiki Adaris. He says, even though it's true that many Tzadikim and Gedali Adaris, Palat Piyam HaKadosh or Kulmasam HaKadosh, Remez V'Ramazim Azman B'Yisam Mashiach. It's true that their pens and their mouths spit out, predictions here and there about when Mashiach is coming. It came from a tremendous emunah and a desire that Mashiach should come. It caused tremendous disheartening and rifin in Klal Yisrael when these predictions were done. What do we gain from going into a dangerous thing like this? To give people something to talk about where tznius is yafa, where discretion would be more advised. And lebesayif, if it doesn't happen, our predictions don't come true, people are just going to become disheartened. Then he brings something, he says, he says, and this is the part that resonated with me the most. The derech shekasafti, what I'm writing over here, by and large, this was the derech of all the tzaddikim and the Gaini Adaris, for all the derech, he says. If here and there you'll find a spotting of a prediction for Gula, don't make a collection of this, don't bring this in a sefer in a serious manner. Be miramis to it in some quick way and pass by. To make a maimer and a psicha to the whole calendar based on these ramazim, these details, it's nisht. Umilan ugadol mimarnach some sefer schusi yagan aleinu shekasav makam echad shebesnas taf reish hu biyas HaMashiach. I think that's 1840. Ubavanisenu arabim yatzu mashiyatzu v'adayanim ben David ba. And Bavanisenu arabim, it went what it went, and then Mashiach's still not here. El chakelei bebetachin, wait for Mashiach bebetachin u'maasecha yikarvucha. And this is he's quoting from it's a Chazal, Maasecha yikarvucha. Your actions will be makar Mashiach, not your prognosticating and your predictions and your fervent hope that this act or this thing or. Masachi Karvucha. It says, Ve'ikr l'chadzik etzlachinu b'nei Yisrael, maminim b'nei maminim, v'yisayd shagulus Yisrael yidei Mashiach, Hashem b'ratzon avinu shebashamayim, v'achakale b'chol yim sheyave, v'ayoyim b'kayil tishmo, v'mchusim b'chol tidrish. This is what Rav Vosner ends off. So, I think it would be very applicable to the shaila we're describing today. Although potentially there is, maybe a possibility to bring a Parah Adumah, to make Sreif HaSefer HaParah, to get fachapt in the narrative that finding a Parah Adumah or making a Parah Adumah is forcing or is a siman that Mashiach is coming, is l'chera, chakele b'betachin, u'masecha yikarvucha. In any case, okay, to be continued. I think the next few weeks I want to do a little series about Kitnius. There's a lot of fascinating fights and shilas that happened about it. I think we'll go into it over the next few weeks. Mitzvah Shem. I don't have time. Let's start with Kitnius.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.